Welcome back to another episode of Bird Feeding with Kurtis. Today we're going to talk about something relatable to just about everybody: bird identification. Now, bird ID is one of those things that whether you are a beginning backyard bird feeder or somebody who travels the world exploring different birds, it's something that we all go through individually. And teaching people how to identify birds can be a pretty challenging thing. One thing that is really unique for me is I am sitting here in a store where over the years I have helped people identify birds thousands of times. And through that process, I've learned over time why the average beginner struggles so much with bird identification. Now, this episode isn't going to be your typical episode where we point out a bird and tell you, this is a Steller's jay. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you how I learned how to identify birds. I don't have any academic background in anything related to birds. By trade, I was an automotive technician, and I was a horrible, horrible student. I learned things based off of my interest level. And I was really bad in school because I was almost never interested in what I was learning. I was interested in getting through school, so I became an expert at doing the bare minimum, but skating by. In university, when I did my trade, it was a little bit more different because I was interested in making a career. However, the real learning happened on the job, not in the school. And that's been pretty similar to my path with learning how to identify birds. Now, I'm not an expert birder per se, but I am a master bird feeder. I don't come across many people in my everyday path that understand bird feeding and are passionate about it the same way I am. I instead come across regularly the average person who loves bird feeding for various different reasons, and it's more of a secondary thing in their life. For me personally, bird feeding is wrapped in every single thing I do. I work 6 days a week in my store for bird feeding, and my one day off, I spend hours studying bird feeding. In my time after work, I'm researching bird feeding. I'm filming content for bird feeding. I am so involved in bird feeding to a level that very few people on this planet are. And that puts me in a unique position to observe and understand things in a way that I can try to express to others that are interested in it just as much as I am, or just curious. Now, curiosity is the key to all of this. And I have been gifted personally with almost nothing in life. I am always typically the underdog. I have to work harder than people to achieve things because I am not gifted with any kind of talent. My gift is curiosity, and curiosity has led me to where I am right today. So, for me, bird feeding or bird identification just kind of happened naturally. When I started bird feeding, I started getting birds on my feeder, and that curiosity to figure out what kind of birds they are was really the foundation to me becoming an expert in this field. So, what I recommend to people when they are starting to identify the birds in their region is really you got to start simple. Now, we get so many people who come in here and they bring very vague descriptions of birds. I get a lot of it was brown, it was kind of puffy, and yeah, well, for me personally, that doesn't really narrow things down at all. Color, especially, I get a lot of. I swear it had a little yellow in it, or it was a little bit more white at the bottom than usual birds. And color is a good thing to note, but colors change through age, season, species, gender. and it's not really the most efficient way to identify birds. So the first thing I would recommend when you want to identify birds, you just have to do it on a case by case basis, but you have to be thoughtful about how you're going about it. So first thing I always do when I see a bird that I want to identify or recommend to somebody is take a photo. Memories are horribly flawed, and if you are trying to identify something based off memory, in my experience, you'll almost never find a satisfactory answer. But if you take a photo, you can research and identify, and then you have a reference point to compare it to. Even if it's not the greatest photo, it's something. Because one thing you'll learn as you become an expert of bird identification is that there's so much more people miss. And a lot of that has to do with shape, behavior, and region. So let's start first with the region. When I was a beginner, I had a bird show up. I was pretty good at identifying birds one by one. You know, it started with house sparrow, and then it started with the collared dove, then it was the black-billed magpie, northern flicker. And the one thing that I came to realize over time is my identification process could have been more efficient and predictable if I was given one piece of advice, and this is the piece of advice. Everybody has 10 common birds in their region. I'm in British Columbia, and we definitely in our town have 10 common birds. Your town is the same, whether it's a house sparrow, a house finch, a cardinal, a northern flicker, a pileated woodpecker, a black-capped chickadee, a dark-eyed junco, and so on. Learn the 10 most common birds in your area. And this is going to be so helpful because part of identification is elimination. For example, I had a physician come into my store about a month ago, and he has been traveling the world studying birds for decades, longer than I've been alive. And he wanted to show me a picture of a raptor he had taken in his yard recently. And I know the area he lives in, and I'm not an expert with raptors, but I know the common ones. I know the sharp-shinned hawk. I know the merlin. I know the Cooper's hawk. I know a lot of the common owls. I know the red-tailed hawk, for example. So when I saw this bird on his phone, the first thing I realized was, oh, this is not one of the most common birds that I know. But I do know the birds of the area, even though I'm not expert at identifying them all. So through knowing what it wasn't and having a few options of what it was, I was able to say, that's a northern harrier, isn't it? Even though I don't know how to identify a northern harrier. I can go back and look it up. But I've trained my brain to understand patterns, behaviors, regions, seasonal variants. And because of that, I don't necessarily need to be a biologist level identification expert, but through process of elimination, I really do understand birds very well. I can't tell you the amount of times people show me a bird that's, say, in the East Coast that I'm not familiar with, or like a flycatcher species that I have no experience observing. But I can pretty accurately guess birds I've never seen before because I have a general understanding of birds, their behavior, their regions. And this is really, really overlooked. What I tend to get a lot in my store is, I saw this bird, help me identify it. And I tell them, oh, that's a male house finch. And that's where the curiosity stops. One of the biggest mistakes people make is they make the goal to identify the birds, but not understand what it is that allows them to identify it. So my best advice to people is, if you are going through this journey and trying to figure out how to identify birds, understand the birds. So when you get a house sparrow landing on your feeder and you don't know what it is, you take a picture, you search the 10 most common birds in my area, And hey, look, we narrowed it down to the male house sparrow. That's really exciting, but that's not where the learning should end. We should be trying to figure out, why did we come to the conclusion? Oh, okay, so there's two different physical appearance of house sparrows. There's the immature and female, and there's the male. Well, what makes it the male? Is it the black cheeks? Is it the chunky brown body? What's the behavior like? Oh, it's hopping on the ground. Well, I saw a bird on my feeder the other day and it wasn't hopping on the ground. So, how do we differentiate species and behaviors as well as shape? There are most common birds that I am an expert in identifying. You could send me a photo of its silhouette in the sunset, and I could not see the color of it at all. But I can identify it by shape, not because I'm gifted, but because I have done repetition. Repetition and practice is the key. It's really difficult when you're around somebody who's very good at something, whether it's a sport or something as simple as identifying birds, because people who are experts at things tend to display their expertise, but you miss the process of what got them there. So rather than me making another video and explaining to you how to identify birds one by one, it's more crucial for me to teach you how to learn to identify birds like a beginner. I could sit here and I could list off these birds one by one and teach you all the field marks. And you might leave watching this video knowing 10 new birds, but that doesn't help you. I am trying to help you learn how to identify birds on your own, not just be another bird identifier. So when we are identifying birds, there's 4 fundamentals that we really should be considering. Number 1 is location. Just simply by having the location you saw this bird, we can really narrow it down to about 90% of species. Because, if you're in Mexico, the list of birds, Mexico in December, the list of birds is going to be different than Manitoba in December. So by location and the time of the year, we can really narrow down the type of birds. The habitat, did you see it in an open field? Was it at your feeder in the city? Did you see it in the mall parking lot? Did you see it in the middle of the forest? Was it down by the lake? These sort of things are all clues that we want to consider. The size and structure of a bird. Everybody knows some common birds. For instance, we all sort of know what a sparrow is. We all sort of know what a robin is, and we all know what a crow is. So how can we use our size reference in comparison to common birds like sparrows, robins, and crows? Was it bigger than a crow? Was it about the size of a crow? Was it about the size of a robin? Maybe it was in between the size of a robin and sparrow. These are all things to look for and document. And the behavior. Was it on the ground? Was it flying? When it flew, was it gliding? Was it hovering? Or did it have undulating patterns where it went flap, 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 stop, flap, 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 stop? So all of these things are really important things to kind of document when we're trying to identify birds, because these clues are so much more crucial than color. Color is always the instinct to snapshot, but color doesn't tell us as much of a story as you'd think it would, because when someone comes in here and says they saw a bird with blue on it, you'd think that we could narrow it down to the 3 birds in our area at that time with blue, but lo and behold, it never works that way, because people's perception of blue depends on the lighting, the skyline, their memory, and how people perceive colors is often different too. So my method for beginners, take a photo and narrow it down. We understand There's sparrows and finches and woodpeckers and jays and raptors. And if we can sort of start to begin to narrow birds down into types of birds rather than the individual species, it gives us a really big head start. One of the tricks that I'm able to use in narrowing down birds, even when I don't know what they are, but I see them, is I've gotten really good at identifying patterns. And the patterns that I aim to identify are those breakdowns of bird types. So I understand the anatomy and behavior of a woodpecker. I understand the anatomy and behavior of a corvid or a jay. I understand the anatomy and behavior of sparrows, doves, nuthatches, blackbirds, flycatchers, owls, hawks, and on and on. So because I've built an understanding of this different subtypes of birds, it really helps me narrow it down, because when I see a finch type bird, I might not know that, it's a Cassin's finch or a purple finch or a house finch just by simply looking at it right away, but I know it's a finch. So that is, and I know it's a finch because of where it is, the region, its general shape and size, the way it flies, and what it's eating. So, really understanding birds is going to be the key to getting out of that beginner phase and really becoming an expert at identifying birds. Because what people are usually trying to do when it comes to bird identification is taking shortcuts. And a lot of people who are experts at birds, they're pretty immersed in it, but that's not totally necessary. Like, most people don't understand why I'm so good at it, and it's because I'm immersed in it. I work in a bird feeding store. I did a lot of studying personally before I opened the store to be an expert for our community. When I get off from work, which I do 6 days a week, I spend Sunday prepping. My days off and my evenings and mornings, I prep content, I film content, I study for content, and I'm trying to learn how to teach people. I understand what I understand very well. I'm very good at what I do, and I'm very confident in my ability to do it. But what I'm trying to learn right now, even, is how to teach people what I've learned. And I tend to do things through elimination, not guessing. So every time I learn a new bird, as mentioned before, I'm not satisfied with that. I want to understand what I learned about it, how I learned it, and how I can remember it. Because every time I add a bird to my list, I'm narrowing down the options. And as I've gotten to become an expert of the birds in my region, I've expanded. Okay, so what are the most common birds of Canada? Oh, okay, so what about the US? Okay, there's quite a bit of overlap there. But there's weird desert parts like Arizona. What kind of strange birds do they have in Arizona? And then you start to layer on the context of the types of birds that are in different areas. Why do blackbirds hang out in marshes? Why do woodpeckers commonly hang out along rivers? Why are chickadees always in areas where there's overgrown shrubs and in creek areas? And you start to learn things like, well, with chickadees, you're going to see them in a different habitat in the wintertime than the spring, because chickadees feed 3,000 to 6,000 caterpillars to their young in the springtime. So where are they going to be? Where there's a lot of caterpillars. But they don't need caterpillars in the winter because they're not feeding their young. So they switch to what's available. What's available in the winter? Seed, nuts, and fruit. So where are chickadees? Where the seed, nuts, and fruit are. That's why you learn a black-capped chickadee for a lot of people they'll see them either in the spring or the winter, but not both, because it's not always a lot of overlap between the variability of food availability. So what I've done is I've learned as much about bird behavior as identification. And that is the layer for me that kind of separates me from the average person. The average person is either a backyard bird feeding hobbyist or a birder that is interested in capturing photographs. I'm more interested in connection and understanding because I am completely driven and fueled by curiosity. Good or bad, it really doesn't matter. It's just who I am. Now, everybody misidentifies birds at first, and it can be pretty frustrating. There was a situation when I first started bird feeding, and I was layering on the birds pretty good, figuring it out one by one. But I did more than just try to identify the birds, because what I would do is I'd see a dove and I'd notice it was on the ground, and I'd think, why? Why is it on the ground when all the other birds are up on the feeder? So then I'd learned that they were ground feeders. Oh, there's ground feeding birds. And ground feeding birds tend to eat things that produce seeds on the ground, like, weed seeds. So I identified ground feeding birds like doves, sparrows, juncos, which are, a sparrow, as weed seed ground eating birds. And then the birds like the finches that like to cling to the feeder, they tend to feed that way naturally off of pine cone seeds or sunflowers. So a lot of the behavior I was seeing at my bird feeders, I was able to apply to their natural feeding, and that sort of took things to another level in how to understand and cater to birds. And in turn, that helped me identify birds and narrow down birds based off behavior before I even knew. Because if I can see a bird and I think that is very finchy, I open the book and I don't need to go through this page by page. I go to where the finches are, and boom, we can narrow down the bird from that subspecies context. But there was a bird that started showing up the first spring. I started bird feeding late fall, something like that. And the next spring, we had these little brown birds coming, like 100 of them. And they weren't like the other birds in my yard. And they kind of looked like maybe they were woodpeckers. They were attacking the ground. There was hundreds of them. And I was convinced they must be baby northern flickers. But everything I kept read kept saying, no, the northern flickers, you're not going to find them in a group of 100. So behavior eliminated that. And then I started seeing these things showing up at work. Then one day, after this took weeks of trying to figure, I was on a journey to try to find these birds. And I realized that they were starting to group up with some starlings. That's when I realized, oh, they were juvenile starlings. And that was my first spring bird feeding. And then I became to realize that, oh, juveniles have different colorations than adults. Even though with starlings, you can't really identify the difference between male and female like you can with a house sparrow or other commonly sex separated birds. And birds are kind of weird because some species, the males and females look the same. Other species, they don't even look like the same type of bird. Like a male red-winged blackbird and a female, you kind of wonder how they're even related. But then you look at a crow and there's absolutely no differentiation. And really, these kind of things you just need to layer on over time. So sadly, I didn't really teach you how to identify any specific birds in this video. So if that was your hope, my apologies. But I want to teach you how to, become the expert level at identification at your own pace, the way that I learned. Because I don't know, I could never sit down in a class and learn bird identification, but I could go out to the park and take photos of birds and then go home and Google them and compare photos. And really, the takeaway from this: document, photographs, write down, record the sound. There's lots of helpful identification tools out there, like the Merlin Bird ID app, where you can just listen to the birds in your yard and identify them by that. And sometimes that's good enough for people. You don't have to be an expert, but if you want to be an expert, learn not just to identify birds, but how, the behaviors, the shapes, the region. Start out with the common ones in your area. When you think you've nailed every bird in your area, if you're in Michigan or you're in New York, where are the birds going to be different? The West Coast. Figure out what kind of birds are in California. And over time, you'll really understand how to identify birds based off experience, shape, behavior, all of these sort of things. And then you're not just guessing, and you're not relying on other people to identify them for you. And overall, that's going to make you more thoughtful. It's going to make you better at identifying birds. And perhaps you could pass that way of learning on to someone else, or modify the way that I do it. And maybe through time, you can become the expert bird identification person in your community, and you can pass on these sort of fundamental tips to become that expert. Bird feeding, birding, it should be fun, it should be immersive, and it should be tailored to your style of learning. There's no right or wrong way to identify birds or understand birds. It's just finding the style that suits you. And a lot of what's taught out there is very academic. And I felt like if I could teach people a non-academic way, a real life way, just a real way to do things the way that I did them with no academic background or understanding, learning how to not just identify birds, but understand birds, connect with birds, and see birds as individuals, not just groups. Because each bird has individual thoughts, decisions. They're not just all starlings. They're not just all house sparrows. They're individual birds, but because we can not really identify and understand them as individuals, we tend to see them as things. That's why when somebody finds an injured bird, or connects with a bird that comes every morning with a hurt leg, something that allows them to be identifiable, people are able to form connections which tend to last a lifetime. So, in conclusion, be curious, take photographs, document, learn to understand, learn to connect, learn behavior, and you're going to become an expert through time. But be patient, because it takes years. Like I said, I'm immersed in this. I have an accelerated path, and I've still almost been at this for 10 years. So 10 years of 8 hours a day plus after work, before work, on the weekends. So be easy with yourself. Take it one bird at a time. Your homework for today: find the 10 most common birds in your city or province, state, country, if you live in a small country, and go and search them and identify them. And you'll be right on track to becoming a bird identification expert. Let me know what you thought of this video, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, and your comments, likes, shares, subscriptions, they're all huge. And I appreciate everyone. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. This has been another episode of Bird Feeding with Kurtis.